Ever feel like, you know that thing where your gut is telling you one thing, but then, oh, gotta do what you gotta do?
You hit the nail on the head there. It's a question that's as old as time, isn't it? The tension between our own moral compass and the demands of, well, authority.
Today, we're diving deep into that very dilemma. It's a real exploration of what makes us tick, you know? And we've got the perfect guide for this journey with excerpts from Stanley Milgram's own words in Obedience to Authority, an Experimental View. So, ready to unpack this thing.
Oh, absolutely. Milgram's work, it just cuts right to the core of this question, doesn't it? Could any of us, and I mean any of us, inflict harm simply because someone we see as, well, an authority figure tells us to?
It's a chilling thought, right? And the way he designed the experiment, it's almost deceptively simple at first glance. We have our players, the teacher, the learner, and of course the experimenter, the one calling the shots.
And it all unfolds in this very controlled setting, right? We're not talking about a lab at Yale University back in the 60s. Now, our subject, the one you read about, they step into the role of the teacher. They think they've signed up for a memory study, something pretty harmless. But oh boy,
Yeah, little do they know what they're in for because we've got the learner strapped into what sure looks like an electric chair. And our subject, the teacher, is told, okay, for every wrong answer, you gotta deliver a shock, and we're gonna crank up the voltage each time.
and here's the kicker, the detail that really sets the stage for this whole ethical tightrope walk. Those shocks, totally fake. The learner, an actor.
So we've got our subject watching someone seemingly getting zapped for messing up word pairs. You'd think, right, that most people would be like, nope, I'm out of here, or at least tap out pretty quickly when they see the supposed pain they're inflicting.
You would think that, wouldn't you? In fact, that's exactly what Milgram figured too. He thought it would be this tiny fraction of people, the real outliers, who would actually go all the way.
But that wasn't the case at all, was it? So, spill the beans. What did Milgram actually uncover?
The results, well, let's just say they sent shockwaves through the scientific community, and rightfully so,
Hmm.
because in his very first experiment, a staggering 65% of those everyday folks, just like you and me, they went all the way, delivering what they believed to be the highest shock level, 450 volts, and all because that experimenter, that figure of authority in the lab coat, told them to keep going.
450 volts. I mean, just saying it out loud sends chills down my spine. Did they see any, I don't know, any common thread in the people who obeyed? Were certain personalities more prone to it, maybe? Like, did they find the obeyer type?
And that's where it gets really interesting and honestly a little unsettling,
Hmm.
because what Milgram found blew that whole idea out of the water. There was no type. It didn't matter if you were a blue-collar worker or a hotshot professional man or woman. It was like this capacity to follow orders. Even when it clashed with their own sense of right and wrong, it was, well, surprisingly widespread.
It really makes you wonder if we're all capable of this, what's going on in our minds when we choose to obey? You know, one of the participants even said something like, I can't believe I did that. I thought I would have stopped way sooner. You'd think the sheer weight of the situation, seeing someone supposedly in pain, would be enough to make them put their foot down.
It's in those moments of conflict, those internal tug-of-wars, that Milgram observed this fascinating, albeit unsettling, phenomenon. He called it the agentic shift.
Okay, so is that what we're seeing here, this whole agentic shift thing? Break it down for us. What's actually happening in our brains?
Essentially, when we find ourselves within a hierarchy, like that experimenter-subject dynamic, our thinking can undergo a shift. We go from acting on our own, making our own calls, to seeing ourselves as, well, almost like instruments carrying out someone else's wishes, the authority figure's wishes, that is.
So are you saying we're practically hardwired to fall in line when someone's higher up on the totem pole?
In a way, yes. But it's not like we suddenly morph into unfeeling robots.
Hmm.
If you read the transcripts from Milgram's experiments, you can practically hear the inner turmoil. Participants were deeply disturbed, they argued, they hesitated, some even trembled. But more often than not, they still went through with those shocks.
Wow, you can almost hear that inner struggle, can't you? That tension between what they feel is right and the pressure to obey. What on earth kept them from just saying, you know what, I'm out, and walking away?
Well, Milgram, he didn't just document this phenomenon, he wanted to understand it, dissect it. What were those factors that kept people glued to that, well, that chair of obedience?
Yeah, it's not enough to just say, people obey. We want to know why.
Exactly. And think about it. The setting itself, Yale University, that's not just any old place, right? It lends an air of, Well, legitimacy.
Yeah.
You're at Yale, these people must know what they're doing, right?
Right, it's like this implicit stamp of approval, like, it's for science at Yale.
Exactly. And that feeds directly into what Milgram called legitimate authority. The idea that this person, this experimenter, they have the right to call the shots, at least in this scenario. And let's not forget, the participants volunteered for this.
Oh, that's an interesting angle. So it's almost like they feel this sense of, like, obligation. Right, well, I signed up for this, so I got to see it through.
Precisely. Like those unspoken rules of, I don't know, social etiquette we've all internalized. Don't question authority,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. It's like that ingrained thing from childhood. Do as you're told. But man, even knowing that, it still feels so, I don't know, almost impossible to resist sometimes.
And that's the thing. Milgram, he documented all these different ways that people grappled with the immense stress of the situation, these coping mechanisms, these little ways they tried to deal with the moral weight of it all.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. What were some of those coping mechanisms? Like, how did people rationalize this in their own minds?
Well, some folks, they went the avoidance route. Milgram observed that they become laser focused on the task at hand, meticulously reading those word pairs, almost like they can block out the supposed suffering of the learner.
So if they couldn't change the situation, they changed how they thought about it. Interesting.
Exactly. And then you had others who went down the denial path, minimizing the learner's pain. Oh, maybe those shocks aren't that bad. Some even started blaming the learner.
Whoa, wait a minute. Blaming the victim
Well,
as a way to justify their own actions.
tough to hear, but yeah, it's a disturbingly common way to make sense of actions that clash with our values. And it's not just confined to the lab.
Wow. It really highlights just how good our brains are at, well, at justifying things, even when we know deep down they're wrong.
Right. And here's the thing. Even when people sensed that something was off, they didn't always have the guts to outright disobey. They might have voiced their concerns, pleaded with the experimenter.
But they still kept going. It's like they got caught in this, I don't know, this web of authority and couldn't break free.
Exactly. Milgram wrote, "The essence of obedience consists in the fact that a person comes to view himself as the instrument for carrying out another person's wishes, and he therefore no longer regards himself as responsible for his actions." Chilling stuff.
It sends chills down my spine, really. And it makes you think about those times in history where, well, where seemingly normal people got caught up in horrific acts like the Holocaust, when people
Right.
said, I was just following orders.
And, that's exactly why Milgram's work is so relevant. He didn't want to just show us how easily we obey. He wanted to figure out, what could actually make people disobey. Those glimmers of hope, right?
Okay, so spill it. Did he find anything? What makes people say enough is enough?
Oh, he found some fascinating stuff. One of the most powerful things was just how close the learner was to the teacher, I mean. Remember, in the original setup, they were in separate rooms, right? But when Milgram put them in the same room, made the teacher actually touch the learner to give the shock, obedience took a nosedive.
Yeah, that makes sense though, doesn't it? I mean, it's got to be a lot harder to dehumanize someone when they're right there in front of you.
Absolutely. And it highlights this idea of proximity, how it affects our empathy, you know. Another variation that really shook things up was when they introduced dissenting peers.
Okay, so like other people saying, no way. How did that change things?
Big time. Picture this.
Yeah.
You're in that situation, you see two other people who are also supposed to be the teacher, and they flat out refuse. They're like, nope, we're not doing this. That kind of social support, seeing others defy the authority figure, it gave people the courage to disobey too.
It's like that saying, it only takes one person to speak up, and suddenly everyone else feels braver.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It speaks to the power of even small acts of defiance. Milgram noticed that it wasn't always about this big, dramatic refusal. Even just, voicing concerns, hesitating, questioning the experimenter. Even those seemingly small acts, they could disrupt things. They could introduce a pause, a crack in that wall of authority.
Almost like a little wake-up call to reconnect with your own sense of what's right.
Exactly. And that's where Milgram's work, it becomes, I'd say crucial for us even today. It forces us to admit that we're all vulnerable to these pressures. It's not just about those extreme situations. We encounter authority figures all the time. Bosses, experts, even those influencers we follow.
Wow, when you put it that way, it really makes you think, when was the last time I just went along with something because it was easier than rocking the boat, even if it didn't sit quite right?
Right. And that's the real takeaway here.
Yeah.
Milgram's work is like this challenge for us. It's about cultivating that inner strength, that ability to hit the pause button and ask, wait, does this actually line up with my values? Am I okay with being, well, just a cog in the machine here?
It's a lifelong journey, isn't it? Figuring out that balance between, well, between respecting authority and staying true to ourselves.
It absolutely is. And,
Yeah.
it's not always easy figuring out the right answer, but just starting to ask the question, that's a huge first step.
It is, isn't it? And on that note, we're wrapping up this deep dive into obedience and the Milgram experiment. It's been quite a journey. Until next time, everyone.